The phone rang at 2:38 a.m. at the Houston police station. "I killed Dean Corll," Elmer Wayne Henley shouted to the operator, his voice cracking. "You have to come now. There are bodies everywhere." The line went dead. When the officers arrived at the apartment on Westcott Street, the smell of death greeted them before they even stepped through the door. Henley, 17, his hands stained with blood, pointed inside. "Look in the closet and under the floorboards." Two decomposing teenagers still chained, meticulously arranged torture tools, and a box full of Polaroid photos that showed boys smiling in the first images. And then, not anymore. In a corner, Dean Corll's corpse lay with 6 bullets in his chest, his glassy eyes still open, as if watching over his macabre handiwork until the very end. Henley, now handcuffed, muttered something. He chose them because he knew no one would miss them. In the early 1970s, Houston was a city experiencing an oil boom, where the wealth of some stood in stark contrast to the poverty of the working-class neighborhoods. Dean Corll, a seemingly harmless candy factory employee, moved like a perfect predator. Born in 1939 in Indiana and raised by an overprotective mother, Corll had a history of sadistic behavior since his adolescence. But his true nature wouldn't be revealed until years later. In the Heights neighborhood, where Corll gained the trust of families by offering odd jobs and giving candy to children, his main accomplices were 2 neighborhood teenagers, Elmer Wayne Henley, 17, and David Brooks, 18. These young men, psychologically manipulated and paid with money and drugs, helped Corll lure his victims, primarily teenage boys between the ages of 13 and 20, many of them runaways or from poor families who wouldn't immediately report their disappearances. Henley and Brooks invited the victims to parties with alcohol and drugs, or offered them money for fake jobs. Once at Corll's Westcott Street apartment or his Pasadena bungalow, the victims were drugged, raped, and subjected to horrific torture sessions. Corll used a specially designed wooden board with straps to immobilize his victims for days. The crimes reached their most macabre point when he began experimenting with body mutilation, preserving parts as trophies. "16-year-old James Jimmy Glass decided to run away from home again. His mother, an exhausted nurse working double shifts at Jefferson Hospital, didn't even notice until the next day. Jimmy was walking along Heights Avenue when Elmer Wayne Henley approached him with an easy smile and a tempting offer. "Hey, you want to make $200 for an easy job? Just deliver some packages." Jimmy, who needed the money to buy a new guitar, didn't think twice. He got into the car, unaware that David Brooks was following them in another vehicle, making sure no one saw them. That would be the last time anyone in the neighborhood would see Jimmy alive. Houston police, in the midst of an era of corruption and with an alarming lack of protocols for missing persons cases, initially failed to connect the disappearances. Between 1970 and 1973, at least 28 teenagers disappeared under similar circumstances, but the investigations were handled piecemeal. Most were children of poor, working-class Hispanic or white families whose complaints didn't receive the same attention they would have in wealthy neighborhoods. In the early morning of August 8, 1973, Henley, apparently remorseful or perhaps afraid of becoming a victim himself, shot Corll 6 times after Corll threatened to kill a girl Henley had brought home. In his 911 call, a hysterical Henley screamed, "I killed a man. Come here quickly, there are bodies everywhere." When police arrived at the apartment, two decomposing bodies still chained, meticulously arranged torture tools, and albums of Polaroid photographs documenting the torture. Some images showed teenagers still alive, with expressions of unimaginable terror. Others captured post-mortem scenes, with mutilated bodies arranged in grotesque poses. The Polaroid photos later found by the police showed the progression of horror. In the first, Jimmy was smiling with a beer in his hand, still confident. In the second, already strapped to the infamous torture table, his blue eyes, so similar to his mother's, reflected pure terror. The third photo was the most chilling. Jimmy lay lifeless, but his Timex watch, the birthday gift his mother had given him that he never took off, still kept precise time. 4:18 a.m. When they excavated his body months later in High Island, forensic scientists noticed blood-curdling details. He was wearing his favorite ripped jeans, but the left sock wasn't his. His mother identified him by a scar on his knee he'd gotten as a child when he fell off a bike. The cruelest part of the Jimmy case was how the system failed him. His photo had appeared in the Houston Chronicle 2 days after his disappearance, but the sergeant in charge of the case noted in the report, probably another runaway who went off on his own. It wasn't until after Henley's confession that they connected the dots. At trial, when Jimmy's photos were shown, his mother fainted in the courtroom. Henley, in a rare moment of apparent remorse, would admit years later in a jailhouse interview, "Of all the kids, Jimmy was the only one who looked me in the eye and said, 'You know this is wrong.'" Today, in Forest Park Cemetery, Jimmy's headstone is simpler than the others, but his mother always leaves fresh flowers every Sunday. The old Timex that once marked his final moments now sits in an evidence box in the FBI archives, its dial forever still at 4:18, a silent witness to the night Houston discovered that its worst monsters lived not under the bed, but in houses with clean curtains and manicured lawns. The following weeks revealed the true scale of the horror. Henley and Brooks led police to several burial sites, remote beaches near High Island, woods south of Houston, and even beneath the floor of a rented shed. In total, 17 bodies were recovered, many of them in an advanced state of decomposition. Autopsies revealed multiple fractures, signs of prolonged torture, and in several cases, evidence of post-mortem genital mutilation. The 1974 trial of Henley and Brooks shocked the United States. The defendant's statements painted Cole as a methodical psychopath who enjoyed recording his victims' screams. Brooks revealed that Cole sometimes forced them to participate in the torture, using threats against their own families as blackmail. The case exposed systemic failures in the handling of missing persons and led to reforms in Texas police protocols. It's been more than 50 years since the screams in the Westcott Street apartment fell silent. Dean Corll is dead. Henley and Brooks are aging behind bars. The graves in High Island were covered with cement, and the houses in the Heights neighborhood changed hands. But in the FBI archives, the yellowed Polaroids continue to tell the story. 28 stolen smiles, 28 clocks that never told time again. Families still wait for justice for the 11 bodies that never appeared. Today, every time a teenager disappears in Texas, someone murmurs, "Is this another Corll case?" Because the true horror isn't that a monster ever existed, but that it showed how easy it is to hide 28 murders in broad daylight in a city that chose not to look, because serial killers die. But their true legacy is teaching us how fragile normality is. Houston learned that too late.